Well, I've talked to the board, and we don't agree with the biblical account. And we think that, in fact, what you're doing is harming the church. Christian Ministries International, you're harming the church, trying to get people to believe that the universe is young and that the Bible is accurate. This is evangelical pastors. Okay. So we have a real problem, even convincing in the evangelical denomination that the Bible is actually true and you can take it for what it's worth. In October, I was speaking in a United Church in Fredericton, and virtually everybody was older than me, and I'm 63, so 20 years that church is dead. And 120 some odd people there, I was talking to them, they looked like, get that proverbial deer in the headlight look? What are you talking about? Right? For them, taking the Bible seriously as the Word of God is foreign to this denomination. And unfortunately, they even have recently a woman pastor, a minister, who's an atheist, and they said, okay, you can stay a pastor at our church. You don't even believe in God. You don't have to believe in God apparently now to be a minister in this particular denomination. Sad, because at one time United Church of Canada had over 2 million adherents, very evangelical, and has slidden down because of the issues that we have here about the age of the earth and the evolution theory. They've accepted that evolution's okay. And this is eventually what happens. People leave the church. So we have two accounts of origin. We have the creation account, that about 6,000 years ago, God had made everything out of nothing. He just spoke it into existence, and there was a global flood. These two, the 6 days of creation and the global flood, are vital components to the creation account of origin. On the other hand, we have an evolutionary account. This is what we're told, that 13.8 billion years ago, first there was nothing, and then somehow nothing became something, and then it blew up. So where did nothing come from? Where did something come from? And how do you go from nothing to something? These are big questions, but that's what the Big Bang postulates. And so we have two competing views. You know, we're told evolution, the Big Bang and evolution is a fact. We don't agree with that. So we have our website, and there's a lot of information. We're only covering one aspect of the age question. There's a lot of other issues. I have lots of resources here that we encourage you to buy, and we have a magazine we're going to ask you to subscribe to. But this is vital information, especially for homeschooler. I know it's very big in Alberta, homeschooling, but there can be a tendency for isolation from what's going on in the real world, the rest of the world, that you need to teach kids what they're going to face. They are going to face evolution. And I'm glad to see a lot of young people here, because your kids are going to, once they leave home and they go to university or whatever, they're going to be faced with these issues, and they need to be prepared with answers to those questions. And there are lots of good questions. And creation.com, that's our website, is an excellent resource. Over 14,000, been over 10,000 articles, and every day there's a new website. I'm going to ask the ushers, and that would be you. What's your name again, sir? What? Craig. Craig, would you pass out the clipboard, please? Thanks. So, I'm just going to take your picture, if you don't mind. That way I can check attendance later. Everybody say fromage. Very good, thank you. One. Okay. Good. Sure. Okay. So that's creation.com. And you just fill out the info bites. This is for info bites. It's a periodic newsletter that comes out. And please write it in English, not Arabic. It's easier to decipher the signature. So a lot of people don't have issues with at least Christians, that God had created, and we see in the natural world God's created design. For example, this, okay, normally I don't have an audio, but okay. The hummingbird, for example, amazing from an aerodynamic point of view. Like, look at that thing. It can hover. The wings are beating at an enormous speed. Look at it. Heart rate 1,200 beats per minute. Just amazing. Okay? So when you think about that, this is amazing. This is amazing design, and a lot of people think, yeah, that speaks to me of God. Even atheists like Anthony Flew was an atheist, decided he was going to believe in God, not necessarily a Christian God, based on the design argument that we see here, this incredible machine, organic machine flying, and design speaks of intelligent design and speaks of God. So we have the evolutionary timeline, and I've even heard Christian apologists believe in the Big Bang, saying that this points to, at one time, that the Big Bang was started by God. William Lane Craig and Hugh Ross all believe the Big Bang is where it actually occurred, right? But Big Bang, the argument here is that nature explains everything. It's not a scientific worldview. It's a materialistic worldview that I don't need God or an intelligent being. We can explain everything, the entire universe, by purely unguided natural processes. It's a materialistic philosophy that is actually being taught. It's really not science, it's a philosophy that's being taught. And so the Big Bang is one explanation of this materialistic philosophy. It is, however, falling out for some scientists, out of favor because it has so many problems with it. But this allegedly, that 13.8 billion years ago, nothing became something. And that in the interim time, there was all this evolutionary events, they said, and in the fossil record, we see all kinds of death and disease and etc. allegedly over millions and billions of years. That's what they're saying. The strata in the rock show us that living things died and over millions and millions of years. So for many people, that's a compelling argument for a long time. The reason why evolutionary theory was accepted, because it's a plausible story. It's an interesting story. You weave a narrative, and it seems to be that way. You may have remembered that Disney put out a movie, an animated story called Fantasia. And in Fantasia, no words, but it shows how slowly a fish started getting legs, and then the legs turned into walking on land, and next thing you know, it starts flying, and it all sort of fits together, and it makes a nice, interesting story. It just happens to be a story, not actual history, and that is a problem. Okay. So we have the biblical account, 6,000 years ago, and the global flood. And the timeline is obviously very short. 6,000 years ago, God made Adam and Eve, and then let me just back up here, and then there was a global flood. About 1,600 years after creation, the world had become so wicked that God decided to destroy all of life on earth. Now this is the biblical name. A lot of people find this very hard to believe. The earth is only 6,000 years old. Okay. And I understand that. But you need to remember that this accounting of history was taught in universities up until about 200 years ago when the Enlightenment occurred. My son got a PhD from Cambridge in math in England. And that's Cambridge and many other universities were started out as institution of learning for preparing people for the Christian ministry. 1209, Cambridge started as a school for training ministers, and this is what they were teaching them, that this was the true history of the world. The idea that there were millions and billions of years is a novel, relatively new in historical context. They didn't believe that several hundred years ago. They do believe this now. Something's happened, and that's what we're going to go to. In fact, this idea of going from 6,000 to billions of years is a problem even for Christian apologists, even for Bible commentators. Gleason Archer, he said this: from a superficial reading of Genesis 1, the impression would seem to be that the entire creative process took place 6 24-hour days, in 6 24-hour days. Yes, it does. The Bible seems to imply it was 6 normal 24-hour days. If this was the true intent of the Hebrew author, this seems to run counter to modern scientific research, which indicates that planet Earth was created several billion years ago. So he's a scholar. He's commenting on the Bible, but notice his wishy-washy words. From a superficial reading, the impression would seem to be, if this was, he's not sure, and he's writing commentaries on the Bible? If he's not sure, what about the rest of all the Christians in North America? Ernest Meyer, a evolutionist, said this: the Darwinian revolution began when it became obvious that the earth was very ancient rather than having been created over 6,000 years ago. This finding was the snowball that started the whole avalanche. So when you had guys like Charles Lyell, who wrote Principles of Geology, he said, I'm looking at the processes that are happening today, such as Niagara Falls. He went to Niagara Falls, and he saw how fast the falls are eroding backward. Well, he said, if it's eroding at this rate, then from the start, it would have been millions of years ago, because it's going very, very slow today. And so this is called uniformitarianism. The processes that we see today have always been happening in that rate, and therefore it would have taken a long, long time, millions and in case billions of years. So this is where he said, so when Lyell came out with this, they said, well, Bible's no longer true on the age question. So we went from millions of years, and now we've gone to billions of years. So before we talk about the scientific stuff of it, what does it matter, though? What does it matter if God created, according to the Bible, 6,000 years ago, or if he used evolution over billions of years? What does it matter? This is the real crux of the question here. Because if it doesn't really matter, you might as well, this is just interesting, it's not really theologically relevant. For many Christians, that is the question. Right? Many Christians have accepted that evolution was God's way of creating the universe. And they have. Apologists have said that. So what difference does it make? It makes this difference. It has a difference as to death. I have a friend who has Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, slow degenerative disease. He can hardly talk now. He says, that's all he can do. It's not working anymore. He can hardly walk, and he's slowly dying. He knows it. It terrifies him. It's extremely frustrating. But why? Why do people die? How did this dying business start? Has it always been this way? Ever since the very beginning of time? That God had used evolution, and he caused things to evolve from a simple slimy algae, live and then die. And then something else comes along and it lives and it dies. And over eons and eons of time, did God use death as his method of creating us? Is that where death came from? So the implication of that, if God actually used death as part of this quasi-creative process, then he is the originator of it. And along with death, you have disease and suffering, which is what the fossil record tells about, disease and suffering. Is God the author of sin, of disease and suffering in this world? Atheists claim, I can't believe in a God who brings cancer in children, who does all these things, terrible things to humanity. I can't believe in a God like that. Frankly, neither can I. But that's not the God of the Bible. That's the made-up God. So, when we look at the Bible, we need to take the Bible as it is written. We need to take it as God's revelation to us. God was there. Nobody else was. He told us how he made everything, and he spoke everything into being. So when people say, well, you can't look at the Bible as a science book, it doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. We need to look at it as a book of history. God is telling us the events of the past. And what did he tell us about the events of the past? Well, the events of the past was, God said, I made things in 6 days, and it was very good. Right? That's what he said. Every day he said it was very good. Okay, so we're assuming that there was nothing bad before that. So at the end of all of this, it was all very good. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. So at this point, there's no death. There's no meat eating for people, and there's no meat eating for animals. People didn't eat animals. Animals didn't eat people at that time. What did everybody get to eat, by the way? Vegetables. Everybody was vegetarian. Even lions ate, and tigers ate vegetables. That's what the Bible tells us. Okay? And it's very possible that they could do so. All right. So, everything's very good. Okay, so when did the bad show up? When did the bad show up? Well, according to the Bible, the bad happened afterwards. God made everything good. Adam and Eve don't eat of the fruit of the tree. They did. Things went bad. God said to Adam, when you do this, dying you will die. And of course, that happened. He didn't believe God and he disobeyed and dying. Okay, so everything was good, then it became bad. What do we do, however, with all those millions and billions of years of things that allegedly that were died, that the fossil record tells us about? Because the fossil record shows us fossils of even dinosaurs with tumors and things like that. We see pictures of dinosaurs eating one another. We actually have a dinosaur actually in a fight, and a raptor is eating or trying to kill a triceratops. Right? So these things of fighting are going on. So where do I place this in the biblical account? I can either put it before everything became very good, but then I have a problem. If everything became very good, then death was before everything was very good. And therefore, the wages of sin is not death. It's not because of what Adam did over here that death came in, but we had death all along, over the billions of years. So therefore, the wages of sin is not death. In fact, they would say that this is how God made everything. Right? And so the Bible tells us without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. So then, okay, what do we do with that now? Then there's no remission of sins. So what if we, however, if all those bad things, all those fossils happened after God made everything good? So in other words, they would have happened, so it was very good, very bad, and this is the result of all that very bad. Okay? So a lot of times people start off with this, and then they say, how can I fit this in? But if you look at the biblical account, it was very good, things went bad because of Adam and Eve, and this is a result. So that means death, disease, dinosaurs all happened dying after, which means, so basically you had Adam's sin, death and bad things entered a very good world, and the fossil record records the bad thing, right? Death and those bad things. This is very important for theological, and here's an atheist who said, it becomes clear now that the whole justification for Jesus' life and death is predicated on the existence of Adam and the forbidden fruit he and Eve ate. Without the original sin, who needs to be redeemed? Without Adam's fall into a life of constant sin terminated by death, what purpose is there to Christianity? None. He is correct. That if there was no Adam, if there was no fall from a state of grace, death was pointless. But the Bible tells us that it was because of Adam's sin that we are in a state of death. And therefore we need redemption. We need salvation. That's what Jesus brought. And so the gospel hinges that there was a historical Adam and that the events of Genesis are actually true. The Genesis account is where it all starts. That's why it's so readily and often attacked, because if you undermine the foundation of any building or any philosophy, you destroy the whole thing. That's why it's being attacked. And it has been attacked very successfully. You know, the Bible tells us that we're in a state of perishing. Humanity is in a state of we're in a state of dying, but only through Jesus Christ can we have eternal life. That's why Peter says, for there is no other name given under heaven whereby we must be saved. Because if we're not saved, then we're lost. And the good news is that you don't have to earn this. It's a gift that God has given to us through faith in Christ. All right, let's look at some of this. So sometimes people have said, well, you creationists, you have your own facts, but the evolutionists have their facts. And you creationists, you twist the facts to serve your own purposes. That's not actually how it works. That's a misdirection. So the fact is, we all have the same evidences. We all have the same facts that we work from. It's a matter of how you interpret what you see. So if I have a fossil, I'm asking questions about how long does it take to make fossils? How old is this fossil? These are the questions. Either side has an opportunity to explain how they think it had happened. Okay? Now you need to remember, nobody can go back in the past and see anything. We're only dealing with the present. So we're making estimates or guesses or hypotheses about the past, and we're trying to say, well, it seems reasonable to me that this explains it better than this other explanation. When it comes to past, nobody can scientifically prove anything. It is impossible because nobody can observe, you can't do any experiments, you can't repeat it. It's just a case of what's the best explanation. And so that's what we're going to do. So in the evolutionist, Charles Darwin is the saint of evolution, right? They're counting on slow process called uniformitarianism, that everything we see happening today has always been happening. But in the biblical view, we believe two things. There is supernatural intervention, where God had made everything out of nothing. So this is supernatural event. And also that there is catastrophes. Catastrophe, that's a global flood of Noah. Well, that would have changed everything very rapidly. Instead of things happening very, very slowly, it would have sped up everything in orders of magnitudes. And so, can evolutionists prove that the events of the past were always slow and gradual? Absolutely not. This is a belief about the past. It is not observed. Nobody was there to observe it. It's a belief about the past. So let's look at some of the very strong icons of evolution. For example, this one here. The Grand Canyon. It is indeed a Grand Canyon. If you go to the Interpretation Center, they will tell you that this was formed by natural processes almost 2 billion years. What they're saying is you're looking into the past. It makes a nice story. For most people, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So let's look a little bit deeper into Grand Canyon. So here's the Grand Canyon. Here's a side view. Okay, I thought that was part of my picture. Okay. The side view here, that's the Grand Canyon, 6,000 feet here. What you're seeing along the side is all the strata. But that strata, what we don't see, goes underground, and it goes, this is north up towards Utah, and this is Bryce Canyon. One of the things you'll notice that this strata goes across the continent. And in fact, in some cases, it'll go over to Europe. The strata, we see this as worldwide strata. And these are sedimentary rocks. They were laid down in water. That's how they got there, and they're laid out as water moved along. But it's interesting to note that what you'll find is that if you follow along the top here, this is about 7,000 feet above sea level, and it looks like something is missing. You see along the top here? This whole thing along here, all this seems that, but by the layers here, that all of this is no longer there. Where did it go? Well, it could have been taken. They suggest that, this little Colorado River carved this canyon, but that's an awful lot of material. And whenever you have a river which is taking material downstream, at the end of the river, you're going to have a delta, like the Nile Delta or the Mississippi Delta. But you don't see that on the Colorado River. There's no delta. It's just a little stream that goes all the way down to the Gulf of California. So where did this all go? It seemed to be that it was all brought into the Pacific Ocean in one swoop, as it were. Okay? And what could do that? You obviously you need some huge amount of water to move all of that right away. All right, let's look a little bit. So this is also here, you have the age, what they say, all these layers, etc. And they have what they call a great unconformity. Apparently there's 500 million years worth of rock that is somehow missing. How do you lose 500 million years worth of rock? Where did it go? Okay. They don't know, I have no clue. But they believe this took almost 2 billion years to get that far. Okay, so here we have a side canyon. This is called the Deer Creek Trail. Give you some perspective in there. So you notice all these little layers. This is called varves. Very, very fine layers. Now, if you're an evolutionist, you're saying that all of these layers were laid out very slowly. Is there a ringing? You're ringing? Is there a monitor? I got some ringing. Okay. You might want to answer it. So, all these little layers. So, how did this material get there? How did all the 6,000 feet of material in Grand Canyon get here? It was carried there by, the answer is, water. Okay? So all of this was brought. So they're saying that, evolution is saying that slowly, one year you have a very thin layer. And next year a very, very thin layer. And if you keep going long enough, they're saying if you do the simple math, it would have taken about 300,000 years to get all these layers to build, this just 1 foot of layers to build up. That's why they say it took almost 2 billion years. Yes, if. So you have water come along, lay down a little layer, another layer, paper thin, etc. That's what they say. Well, it's interesting what is missing here. So these layers are paper thin and they're stacked up all the time. Now, they were brought by water, but what you don't see is any erosion. Think about that. I have a layer made up, brought by water, but between the next layer, there is no erosion. Does that mean that there was no rain or anything in between there? That's hard to believe. And yet, over hundreds of thousands of years, the only way you got a layer was by slow settling out. But what about erosion? There's no evidence of erosion in any of these layers. How is that possible? Over hundreds of thousands of millions and billions of years, no evidence of erosion. You also don't see any plants, any roots. That means you got the soil, the material there, and nothing grew? How is that? That doesn't make any sense. So those are some why this is not likely to have occurred very slowly over millions and billions of years. In fact, nobody's actually ever seen this happen over millions and billions of years, have they? No. All right. So is there any other way that we can get all this type of layering here in a rapid succession? For creationists, we don't have billions of years to work with, we have thousands of years. So we have to speed things up a lot. Right? So is there any evidence that this type of thing could happen in a very short period of time? Well, actually, yes. Okay. In Missouri, in the Missouri River, and like the Mississippi River, there are these paddle wheelers. They have a wooden hull, a wooden bottom, and every now and then they get hauled by a tree trunk and they sink. And this particular one, Steamboat Arabia, is carrying a lot of household goods. And they knew it sunk because they were all part of a schedule they were maintaining. And so somebody later on a number of years ago said, well, maybe we can recover what's in this ship and make it into a museum. They did. So the museum is just Steamship Arabia in Kansas City, Missouri. You can go and see it. Got lots of wonderful stuff to see. And so where did they find this ship? How would they actually locate this boat? You would think you look in the river, right? But it wasn't. It was actually half a mile from the river. A riverboat half a mile from the river. How did it get there? Well, this is a meandering river. As the river goes down, the river changes shape. The Missouri and the Mississippi River actually change shape over time and material. So Bob Hawley and his sons used a proton magnetometer. I have no clue what that is. But anyway, so they found it in a farmer's field. They outlined it and they said to the farmer, we need to dig up your field. The guy says, okay, you got 1 season to dig it out because I got to fill the hole in and I got to do planting again. All right. So that's what they did. Right? So what they found, notice, missing for 132 years under 45 feet. It was 45 feet deep and it was 132 years ago. And this is what they excavated. Now they got these pumps here because it's sand and there's a lot of water coming in. They got to keep pumping it out, the water, so they can excavate it. You can see this is the remains of the steamship, and etc. It's amazing. What's interesting also, if you look along the sides here, you see that? Look a closer look along the sides here. Why, don't that look just like that Deer Creek Canyon? It looks exactly like it. And that is how these things form. As water flows through, it deposits a layer. But it doesn't take 1 year to do a layer. It continually does it. In fact, how do we know this? This is 45 feet deep in 132 years. Think about that. I can get 45 feet of this in 132 years. So when I got a Grand Canyon of 6,000 feet, it's not going to take anywhere near 1 million years to do that. We also have some other evidence which is a little more striking, and that is in the what they call Mount St. Helens. Anybody heard of this? Mount St. Helens? Anybody visited Mount St. Helens? Okay. Before or after? After, yeah. We did too. In 2001, we actually traveled there. And so what this was a dormant volcano in the southeast part of the state of Washington. Actually, not too far from here, I don't think. At least it's a lot farther than Montreal. And so in 1980, there was rumblings. They knew it was going to happen. Actually, good videos on YouTube about that. And it blew up. 1,800 times the force of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Winds are 250 miles an hour. It blew trees flat 10 miles away. It was massive. And some people didn't think it was going to happen and perished in it. So that's tragic. So what happens is, and here we have a picture of it later. So this top is gone. It literally blew its stack. Okay? And it poured it down. You can see this here where I'm tracing out. That was a material that came down from the mountain in pyroclastic flows and built up about 600 feet of debris at the bottom. Some of the trees were in Spirit Lake. They're still there, floating and vertically, and etc. In 1982, there was another subsequent eruption here. Now this is snow covered. It's about 300 feet of ice, and now if you go there now, it's actually covered in snow, the top. Okay, so high up and so cold. So this erupted in 1982, and again sent pyroclastic flow down the mountain and carved the canyon through the material that was laid down just 2 years earlier. Okay, forget that I just mentioned that. You will happen across this canyon. You happen across this canyon. Doesn't it look a bit like the Grand Canyon? A little bit? Okay. You might ask yourself the question, if you didn't know otherwise, okay, this river here coming down, how long do you suppose that river took to carve this canyon out? Right? If you didn't know otherwise, you'd think, well, it would have taken a very, very long time for that little river to carve the canyon out. But you'd be asking the wrong question, because that river did not carve the canyon. This was a material laid down in 1980. This canyon here was carved out by the eruption in 1982. All of this material was carried downstream in 1982. How do we know? Because we saw this. This was seen. So I have an entire canyon carved out in 1 year. Also, notice along the sides here. Look at that. What do you see? All these layers. This layer, for example, 20 feet was laid down in 1 day. 20 feet. And this is the material that was laid down in 1980, 600 feet of it. So if I can get 20 feet in 1 day, how many feet am I going to get in 300 days? Well, I would get 6,000 feet. And how deep is Grand Canyon? 6,000 feet. So here we can see, we have actually observed this. So is there any type of, when you think on a global scale, we think in terms of, well, what would the flood of Noah have done? It would have sent the water all around the world and all the debris and all the mud and all the stuff and settled it out in layers and after layer after layer. Tsunamis going on around the world, building up all these layers, and then material behind the water that was stacked up behind this would have then come and gushed down right through the canyon and carved it all out in a very short period of time. So because we have observed this, I can get 20 feet in 1 day. Why do I have to believe then that this took 1.2, almost 2 billion years to form? I don't. The entire year makes a lot more sense based on what we observe. And when we talk about observing it, we're talking about real science. 1.8 billion years is just guessing. What about polystratic fossils? Polystratic fossils are fossilized trees that go through strata in the rocks. Now, if these strata took millions of years to form, the tree would have had to keep growing through those rocks, through those layers as they were building up, which means the tree would have had to be millions and millions of years old. Well, I don't think anybody believes trees grow to be millions of years old. Or the other thought is that through the flood, trees were caught upright, and the layers were all brought there by the sedimentary action, and they all then hardened together. And so this was done in the global flood rather than over a long period of time, because postulating trees living millions and hundreds of millions of years old is not really reasonable. And what about these folded sedimentary rocks? Look at some of them are folded 90 degrees. How do you bend rock? Well, here we have, you see the car on the bottom here? This entire mass of rock was bent almost 90 degrees, almost 200 feet here. How are you going to bend that? Think in terms of evolution. It's one small layer every year. Okay, I can get a flat layer, but to tell me that a layer is going to be bending 90 degrees when it laid out, brought there by water, how is that possible? Doesn't make any sense. Right? So what it looks like is that this was in a plasma state. It was all soft. It hadn't turned to rock yet, and you had some continental plates moving, and that pushed one up and bent this entire thing, and it stayed that way, and it hardened. That makes sense. Well, what kind of event would have moved continents, moved plates? Well, the flood of Noah would have certainly have been enough energy to do that. What about dinosaurs? Everybody loves dinosaurs, especially kids. Oh, I got 4 sons. We're always into dinosaurs. Now I got 2 grandsons. Oh, the dinosaurs. So let's ask the question, how long does it take to make a fossil? What have you been told? 4? I got an answer 4. Okay, I'm not sure what. 4 years, okay. So you tell in school that it takes millions of years. In fact, Charles Darwin himself believed that it took millions of years. Very slow process, transfer molecule. Now, what is a fossil? It's something that has been turned to rock. It could actually be a bone, which has been through permanent relation turned into rock. It could also be a leaf which has been put together. The leaf is no longer there, and all we have is the impression. That's a leaf. That's a fossil of a leaf. Okay? The actual thing doesn't have to be there. It's just an impression of it. So when I look at fossils, these are things that have been turned to stone, turned to rock. So here's some things that have been turned to rock. How old do you think these keys are? Fred Flintstone's car, maybe? Not likely. Okay. So pliers, okay, it's not going to be a million years old. Maybe thousands? No, maybe not thousands. Hundreds of years. That hat turned to rock. How old do you think that is? Maybe 100 years, maybe something like that? No more than that. So my son, who was going to Cambridge, in 2015, my wife and I decided we're going to visit him. And while we're there, we're going to tour England. And guess what? It wasn't raining. Amazing. It was fantastic. The whole 2 weeks, it wasn't raining. Right? So we went to a place west of York called Knaresborough. And Knaresborough, the Mother Shipton, has a petrifying well. And so this is a waterfall. You can't really see it's overgrown. And all this water drips down into a pond down here. You can barely see the water drop. And you can walk around there. And they hang things in that waterfall. Things like hats, shoes. I don't think this is a real lobster. Ooh, really creepy. Okay. Hats and shoes, etc. And even these soft teddy bears, they hang in there. And after 3 months, these soft teddy bears turn to rock. I picked this up myself. Think about that. Here we have concrete evidence that it doesn't take millions of years. You can turn something into rock in 3 months. Okay? And here we have a waterfall. How old do you think this waterfall is? Millions of years? It's turned into rock, but it's actually a waterfalls in Australia. So it's obviously not millions of years old. So with these teddy bears, the hats, and the waterfall, why do I have to believe, for example, that dinosaurs took millions of years to fossilize? I don't. I don't have to believe, because fossilization is a very rapid process. In fact, you said 4 years. Well, we got 3 months. It could be even faster than that. So Charles Darwin said that because he thought that fossilization would take a very long time, that you're never going to find a fossil of an invertebrate. In other words, a creature which doesn't have a backbone, it doesn't have bones, such as octopus or jellyfish. So he thought they was never going to find one. Guess what we find? Well, we find fossils of an octopus. Allegedly, they say it's 95 million years old, but it looks like a very modern octopus. In fact, here it is the fossil. The lady was able to take the ink, reconstitute it, and actually paint a picture of the octopus. But this has no bones in it. So in order for it to become a fossil, it couldn't have had time to rot or decay. So it must have turned into a fossil very, very quickly, in a matter of days. In fact, Jellyfish. If you've ever been to the seashore, you see a dead jellyfish. How long does it take before it turns into mush? A day, maybe? So this jellyfish must have made a big impression in a matter of a day or less. Fossils can be had in a day. And here we have some fish, marine reptiles. Ichthyosaur giving birth. Now we talk about long labor, but this is definitely not going to take millions of years. So the fossil, this fish, or a marine reptile actually, obviously was buried and it turned into rock before it had time to decay. And obviously before the mother had time to give birth. Look at the fish on the bottom. We find these fish fossils in the billions. Sometimes packed like millions in a cubic meter. Obviously they've been in a flood, they've been trapped in a flood, compressed by the weight, but you can tell that this did not have time to rot. It's like it's frozen in time. There's no evidence. You can see all the ribs and the spine and the fins at the back, even the fish that it was in the process of eating. It was in the process of eating, it got buried and turned into rock almost within a matter of probably hours. Didn't have time to. In fact, fossilization can happen instantly. Secular Scientific Journal says so. Wow, instantly. So this is from New Scientist. This is a fossilized fern. This is a fossil of a plant. And the photo shows a close-up of preserved cell walls and the nucleus containing genetic material. They were able to section it, and it preserves so fast that this plant didn't have time to decay. Take a plant, kill it, leave it on your counter. How long before it's wilted and there's nothing? It's going to be days maybe. So, I didn't say it was instant. New Scientist says. This is a secular magazine, says the plant was almost instantly fossilized. Secular magazine admits fossilization can be an instant process. I do disagree, however, with this explanation. Suddenly engulfed by a lava flow. Okay, come on. You remember that Hawaii volcano and the lava coming down and it's coming towards this car? It's coming within 7-8 feet of the car and the car's bursting into flames because of the intense heat. What do you think is going to happen to a fern which has been buried in hot liquid rock? It's going to vaporize instantly. So it doesn't make any sense. So when we see all of these fossils that can happen as fast as instant, why do I have to believe that dinosaur bones, why do I have to believe it takes millions of years? We actually have the evidence and the real science to show that it could happen extremely fast. What about DNA? You remember, anybody watch the Jurassic Park movies? I think the fourth one. I watched the fourth one. Again, scientists doing things wrong again and again and again. It's like non-stop action. So how long does DNA last? So I have here a piece of resin, amber, and it has an insect in it. I picked it up in Tallinn, Estonia, and because I wanted one. I remember the Jurassic Park movies, the precept, Dr. Michael Crichton wrote that book, Jurassic Park, and the scenario was that a mosquito bit a dinosaur and extracted some dinosaur blood. It got trapped in amber millions of years ago, 65 million years ago, and then it got preserved in it. So scientists were able to extract from the mosquito some dinosaur blood, DNA, mix it with reptiles, and create these reptiles, and the dinosaurs were reborn. Okay? That's the premise of the movie, and everything that goes crazy after that. Okay? It's a very scary movie, but it's... So the question was, they said, well, really, how long does DNA last? DNA is a very complex molecule, has to be inside the cell, and like any organic material, as soon as the thing that is in dies, it starts to decompose. Every organic material does the same thing. So they said, now this is Nature, the premier scientific journal in the world, says it has a half-life of 521 years. It's a little too precise, but close enough, right? So that means that DNA is not going to last millions of years. It's only going to last maybe thousands of years at best before basically there's not a whole lot left. Very complicated. What do I do, though, when I have dinosaur DNA? Find dinosaur DNA. Well, it shouldn't be there. The dinosaur died out 65 million years ago, right? That's what they say? Well, in 2005, a Dr. Mary Schweitzer was doing some research into Tyrannosaurus rex bones. But this bone was not fossilized. How can bone not be fossilized after that period of time? Right? It's supposed to 65 million years. As she was digging through, she found organic material. In fact, the ABC News had a whole segment on it with Sawyer, I think it was. A whole hour session, and they're talking about it. Isn't that amazing? They're showing it on the lab, etc. Fantastic. Flexible, resilient when stretched, returns to its original shape. Dr. Schweitzer said, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. Fully agree with her. They are virtually indistinguishable from modern species. So if this is the case, if from Tyrannosaurus rex bones I can get modern organic material, what does it say about how old these bones are? It tells her that they're very recent, within thousands of years, not millions of years. It beggars the belief to think that organic material in the wild can stay uncorrupted, without decaying over millions and millions of years. And we know that scientific, CSI experts, crime scene investigators, forensic science will tell you that, how usually can date things by how fast they have decayed. And you're certainly not going to find things that are millions of years old. It's kind of like an NCIS episode. Anybody remember NCIS, the television show with Dinozo? And in one particular show, they had a American Civil War casket. And this casket was of a soldier that died in 1860. They said it had never been opened since then. And on TV, they're going to open it. So you see the opening, the back side, you see the opening the casket, and then the guy with the camera puts his camera down. Because on the remains is a cell phone. Wow. Cell phone on a casket that hasn't been opened since 1860. So I have two possible choices now. I can either believe that somebody has recently opened that up and put a cell phone in there, or that during the American Civil War, they were actually using cell phones. Which is the most plausible answer? Obviously, the one with the recent. I don't know how they do it, but obviously they don't have cell phones during the Civil War. All right. I like this particular next thing because it is readily grasped by people who don't necessarily have a scientific background. World population. In the world today, we have about 7 billion people. That's a lot of people. So if I'm an evolutionist, I believe that humans are around for 1 million years. I'm going to say it takes about 1 million years or more to get 7 billion people on the earth today. With ups and downs, people ups and downs. I'm a biblical creationist. I say I don't have millions of years to work with. I only have the population after the flood. We're all descended from the 3 sons of Noah after the flood, which is roughly 4,500 years ago, 4,500 years ago. So I'm a biblical creationist. I have to say, well, it would have taken 4,500 years. In 4,500 years, I can get 7 billion. So those are the two options you got. Which do you think it comes closer to the truth? 7 billion is an awful lot of people to get in 4,500 years, don't you think? I mean, that seems like a short period of time. But evolutionists, that million years to get 7 billion? Well, okay, so we got these two competing views. Which one fits with reality, what we know about population? So I went to the source of all knowledge. I went to the internet. Worked a world population. I went to the BBC. This is not the Better Bible Company. It's the British Broadcasting Corporation. Okay? And on it, they had a chart like this. And I thought, voila, look at this chart. This is fantastic. It's exactly what we need. All right, so on the side here, you got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 billion. It's actually off the chart here. I put the cross on it so you know when 2,000 years ago was. That's when Jesus was on earth. And I looked at it and thought, well, this is an interesting chart. Right about here, about 4,500 years ago, there's a dip. What happened 4,500 years ago? You're right, the flood. Okay? Isn't quite dipped enough, but close enough for what we're looking at here. But what I really found interesting is this. The BBC, a secular news source, on their website for children, says that at 4,000 BC, 6,000 years ago, there was next to nobody. Wow, I said this, maybe they had a creationist on staff, and he stuck this in the website, and they didn't notice. Right? I don't think so. But BBC has endorsed the biblical account as far as world population goes. But you know, there's more to this story than just see here. You'll notice that exponential growth. In the last several hundred years, the world population has grown enormously. China had in the mid-70s 400 some odd million people. Now they got 1.3 billion. If the population keeps on growing, what happens? How many people are we going to have? Or let's look at another. If creation started not 6,000 years ago, but 7,000 years ago, just 1,000 years earlier, slide over here. Actually, it's a little too hard, but so how many people would we have? Roughly 450 billion people. That's for only moving creation 1,000 years earlier. That's how many people would be on the earth today. That's projected. And that's not possible, but that's how many people. So how come we only have 7 billion? I can get 7 billion in 4,500 years. How come I only have, that speaks to the Bible account. If I'm an evolutionist, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to say, well, human population was at extinction level for 999,999 years, which then is very hard to accept because you need a minimum population for a population to continue to grow. This happened in the animal kingdom. You got only 2 left, it's going to wipe out. It's not going to, especially when you have mutations and stuff. Okay? So what else? Well, then let's say the population went up. Let's say in 10,000 years I got 5 billion people, and then they all died out, except for 2. A man and a woman who happened to like each other. Right? And then it happened again, wiped out. And again, wiped out. Thousands and thousands and thousands of times of building population out and then decimating them. And where's the evidence for that? 0. There's no evidence for that. Otherwise, we have the remains of quadrillions of people that would have existed. We only have 7 billion people on the earth. Where are all the rest if we've been around for a million years? There aren't. So this speaks clearly to a biblical origin, a young earth. Okay. DNA or mutations. We're told that mutations are very important in biological evolution. Natural selection acting on mutation. Okay. What are mutations? Mutations are errors in copying of the genetic code. Some mutations are very bad. They kill whatever has a mutation. Some are rather freaky. But the thing you need to know is, number one is that beneficial mutation is what evolution relies on. There are next to no indisputable beneficial mutation that we have observed gaining function in a species. It's all magical. It's all mystery. The actual beneficial mutations are more in the mind. The idea that somehow a fish slowly got legs, and those legs eventually so allowed to walk on land, and then it allowed it to get feathers, and these feathers then to wings, etc., etc. This has never been observed. It's believed, and so people are thinking, we think it happened, so let's try to find some fossils that fit that. It doesn't work. So, mutations, however, either are very neutral or they're harmful. But the thing to note, they accumulate over time. So my wife and I have 4 children, and we have left, during a lifetime, we have maybe 60 mutations in our genetic code, passed on through the next generation. So my children, I have 4 sons, will have inherited them, plus during their lifetime, they also accumulate mutations. It then is passed on to, so I go from 60 mutations, now there's a next generation, 120 mutations. Now my grandchildren inherited from their parents, my children, and then they're going to have more mutations, okay, during their lifetime. And of course, it goes on and on. So what happens to all this accumulation? And there's no way to get rid of them. Sometimes they don't have, natural selection cannot. And this is a known problem in the genetic world, mutational load or genetic burden. It's actually called Haldane's dilemma. That how come we keep adding mutation every generation, eventually we're not going to be able to survive. It's a downhill slope, right? Which is exactly what, this is a chart, a fitness chart that shows that over time, right, things go down. Evolution, however, requires things to go up. And yet, to get in the real world, things are going down. We are getting less fit. We're having more mutation. There are things that are happening that I've never heard of. And it's adding into the genetic code and more. Evolution says it has to go up. Absolutely contrary to known science. And they say that if we keep on, evolution says, we keep on improving, we get better and better. Eventually we become more than human. We'll be transhuman. We'll become something else and eventually become godlike. But the real reality is we're degenerating. This is an inviolable scientific law. Dr. John Sanford, in his, he wrote a book on that called Genetic Entropy. I'm not sure we have that here, but it's a good, he wrote that. This would also explain declining lifespans. When Adam and Eve were living, they meant to live forever. Through the fall, their lifespan was shortened to 900 and some odd years. We think that's a long time, but if you're going to live forever, 900 is being cut short very much. And of course, what happens is every generation you have more mutations, the lifespan gets shorter. And so what's happening, as you see, that the lifespan going from 900 down to 700 years, we're about here now, right? 70, 80, something like that, years lifespan, which would basically, Adam and Eve had perfect DNA. We don't. We're getting worse and worse over time, which fits in with the biblical account. What about living fossils? Living fossils are allegedly those things which died a million years ago, but we still see them today. Okay, like the coelacanth. Originally 65 million years ago, they found this fossil, said, wow, this is 65 million years old. However, these things are still alive. Here's a video of them off the coast of Madagascar. They have coelacanth. They're pulling them up. The reason is they were supposed to be a transitional, because if we look at their limbs, they say, well, these are slowly turning into, legs to walk on. But as you can see, those aren't legs, but these are very fancy fins, etc. Look at that. It's rather unusual. Okay? It allows it even to hover vertically, etc. Exceptional fish. Look at that. So it can obviously not be ancestral if it's still existing now, if it's modern there now. Okay? The interesting thing is, so here we have an ammonite. I was in Bon Secours, Marché Bon Secours de Montreal, old Montreal. There's an ammonite fossil about this big. It's huge. I said, I want it. Looked at the price tag. I don't want it anymore. Okay? It's about $4,000. Right? I said, wow, this would make a great thing. And the date were 500 million years ago. Ooh, okay, I can't afford that. Right? But I think we don't have 500 million years ago. The thing is, ammonites are alive. They still exist. But the interesting thing is, coupled with that mutation over time, how is it possible that a creature has not undergone change in 500 million years? How is it possible, knowing what we know about genetic mutations over time, it should have degenerated and died off? How could it still be alive? That's interesting, right? Doesn't make any sense. Okay? Why do I have to leave the millions of years old? Okay, we're going to skip over some stuff. Anybody cold in here? No, okay. Or nobody's going to say. All right. We're going to go over to, here. Okay. So we're told, now you have in Alberta, you have oil. You dig up oil, although I see many of your machines not working. And at $10 a barrel, I don't think there's much to be had in it, right? Terrible. Although as a consumer, put in my gas tank, I don't mind. But so how long does it take to make crude oil? What have you been told? Underground, that plant material get buried, and how long does it take to make crude oil? Any guesses? Millions of years, you're told. Okay. However, that's not borne out by any scientific evidence, because you can actually make crude oil in an hour. And you can take oil or algae and turn it into crude oil. In fact, there's a guy in the United States who's farming algae in order to, do a process to turn it into crude oil. And however, trying to do it economically is the problem. Not $10 a barrel for oil here, it's going to be hard to justify algae oil. Right? But it's the same stuff that you use to put into cars, you can refine to make cars. It's exactly. So somebody said take millions of years. I say, well, I don't think so. You can do it in an hour. Oh. When you go, anybody been spelunking? Spelunking, what's that? Cave exploring. If you're claustrophobic, this is not your sport. Okay? So you'll notice, of course, the stalactites and stalagmites. right? They tell you, don't touch that, sir, you don't want to break it off. It took hundreds of thousands of years for these things they're hanging tight, so the stalactites are coming from the ceiling, stalagmites are on the bottom, okay? And they take hundreds of thousands or longer to form, so don't touch it, don't break it. I said, no, it can't be. They're 100 millions of years, but we also have them in Montreal. It's not in our caves, it's actually in our sewers. That's right, in our sewer. So here is on the Montreal Tourism website, you'll see here a complete stalactite, stalagmite from the top to the bottom. Now, these are no longer used sewers, just so you know, if you ever visit Montreal. But I'm saying, wait a minute, this is not even 200 years old. We've got a complete stalagmite, stalactite connecting. Why do I have to believe it takes hundreds of thousands of years to form? Right? I don't have to, because we know it takes like less than 200 years to get the same thing. So I've been in aviation for 40 years. And whenever I see an airplane, I always look to see what it is. My wife says, what are you looking for? It's always the same plane. Yeah, but it might be different this time. Okay. Anyway, so I went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Anybody know where that is, Oshkosh? This is airplane heaven. It's an air show for a whole week. World War II, including World War II planes like this and just roaring, fighters. And if you're into, anyway, I'm getting a little carried away here. So, in the World War II, they were ferrying airplanes for the war effort in Europe from the United States through Canada and over Greenland. Well, in 1942, there was an emergency landing of a number of P-38 Lightnings and a B-17 bomber. They had to land on Greenland. And they all survived. They all walked out, but they couldn't take off again. And so they sat there. In the 90s, some rich American said, hey, maybe I can get me some of them planes that are just sitting out there. Right? So he said, because they weren't really damaged, they were just stopped, and then they were covered in snow. So he said, well, how deep can they be? Well, he did a bit of research, and he went online to the internet, and he looked at the Greenland ice sheet. Well, they say that the Greenland ice sheet is some 2,000 to 3,000 meters thick, or about 2 to 3 kilometers thick. And they said it took 100,000 years for all this layers to build up. They said, so the guy did some estimates, says, well, you know, roughly based on about 6 centimeters per year. That's about that much per year. You know, so if I got 60 years, I calculate it's about 3 meters or 10 feet. Oh, it's not a big deal. I get a bunch of shovels out there, get a bunch of guys, we'll go down 10 feet and dig it up. Not a big deal, right? Makes sense. You get all them planes and then send them back to the United States. So he got his crew out there on Greenland. They were digging, and then they were digging, and they're digging, and they found that they were a lot deeper than they thought. 85 meters or 278 feet deep. Wow, he said, this is not quite what we thought. My shovels aren't 207 feet deep. They actually had to dig a hole and dig down 278 feet. That's very deep. And they actually did manage to extract one of the planes, put it together, and actually is in flying condition. So what happened was with this, and these cores have impact on climate change. Global warming is based upon these Greenland and Antarctic ice cores. They're saying it took hundreds of thousands of years, but wait a minute now, there's something off with the math here, right? Because instead of, this should have been only 10 feet deep and it's 278 feet. So it's not 6 centimeters per year. It's, in fact, 1.7 meters per year, or 28 times faster than is believed. So how long would it have taken to get 2 to 3 kilometers, 2 to 3,000 feet? Well, it would have taken roughly 1,764 years. Actually, this could have accumulated since the time of Christ, within 2,000 years. This is based on observed depth, right? So obviously, the math, what we're told, again, people are trying to fit things in with a theory of evolution, and are coming up with this reality check that, hey, it's not 6 centimeters per year, it's 28 times that. So why do I have to believe it took 100,000 years to form all this Greenland ice sheet, when actually it can do it all in 2,000 years? Interesting. And they actually did get this thing flying. I don't have time really to go into Pluto, but it's flat, and they thought it would be pockmarked with holes, but It's much too young. Okay, let's talk about moon dust. This is interesting. So we no longer use moon dust as we did in the 30, 40 years ago as evidence for stuff on the depth, as evidence for young Earth. Okay? But there is something interesting here. In October, Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969. Yes, we do believe they actually landed on the moon. Okay? And I remember watching it as a kid on television in July. It's hot, watching black and white television. That's one small step for man, that's one giant leap for mankind. Right, amazing. Well, actually landed on the moon. So what was amazing about it is that they thought that the moon, being 4.6 billion years old, would be covered with much dust on it. And so they built the big disc on the legs of the lunar lander so it wouldn't sink into all this dust. Well, they had sent some other probes up there, and they realized that it wasn't nearly that much dust, but it was too late to change the design, so it landed with those discs anyway. So when Neil Armstrong jumped down the moon, it was just a little bit of dust, a little poof, okay? And made everything very dirty. All the astronaut suits were just covered in this moon dust. And they thought they had to decontaminate it when they came back to Earth. Later that year, Apollo 12 also landed on the moon dust, and they had put a collector on there called a dust collector. So it was automatically transmitting back to Earth. They want to know how much dust is being collected on the moon. Okay? So it didn't last very long, from 1969 to 1977. So it had a very short period of time in which to calculate how much dust. And they recently analyzed, and they figured that the dust forms at a rate of approximately 1 millimeter per 1,000 years. Now we can't really take that, but we're just using it for an example here. That's not a lot of dust in 1,000 years. But if dust accumulates at 1 millimeter per 1,000 years, and if there are only 3 to 7, in fact, there's only 3 to 7 millimeters of dust on the moon that they've observed, that means the age of the moon dust could only be 3 to 76,000 years old. Way shorter than the 4.6 billion alleged. But if the moon is 4.5 billion years old and the moon dust collects at 1 millimeter per 1,000 years, that means there should be roughly 4.5 kilometers of dust on the moon. So we only find a little bit, not what would otherwise be expected. So this is evidence that, we can't really use it because the sample is too short. It's not enough time. We don't actually use it because there's many other evidences to do that. Okay. All right, this is one last one, I think. One last one. So I was going through the internet, and I came across this website, Naturalis Historia. Title caught my eye. The Nika Cave of Crystals is a giant problem for a young Earth. I said, oh no, all that I believed in is crumbled. Okay, let me think about, and sometimes this is what you're going to be faced with. Somebody's going to throw this at you, and you're going to be like, oh, okay, wow, okay, I don't know, what do I do with it? So I want to help you to understand the thinking process here. So you read this. Initial estimates range from hundreds of thousands to possible millions of years. And he said, this is a major problem for young Earth proponents. I'm a young Earth proponent. Okay? So how am I going to deal with this? Went to BBC, looked on their website, and they said, well, these are the crystals, as you see here, used. They were a mining company, was draining water out of the bottom of a mine, and they came up with these gypsum crystals. They were huge. It's very hot down there, 58 degrees Celsius. That's smoking hot, okay? It says around 26 million years ago. And very slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, right, these crystals took place. I'm thinking, wait a minute. How does anybody know this? Was anybody there to see it? No. This is just based on how old they think everything is. I thought, well, let's ask you some questions. Let's look at these crystals a little bit more. You see these guys here? You can see how huge those crystals are. Remind me of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, doesn't it? These little guys. They're all in suits, and you look up closer. Look at the guy climbing over the crystal. They said if you put the water back in, the crystals continue to grow. When the water's not there, they stop growing. Well, so the question here is, okay, for operational science, empirical science, Yes, these are gypsum crystals. They are, some of them, 65 feet long. Yes, they will continue to grow when you put it back in. Okay, this is what we know because we can observe all this stuff. If people don't think they're gypsum, well, we can take it to a lab and we do analysis, and yes, it's gypsum. That is not what's under debate here. The issue of debate is related to the past. How old are these crystals? How long does it take to make a crystal? How fast do they grow? These are assumptions that people are making when they say it took 100,000 years old. It took 100,000 years to form because nobody obviously saw that, and you can't put it to a test. But what can we find out about how fast crystals grow? So again, I went to the internet and looked on there, crystal growth. Well, you know that they actually have crystal growing contests. Here I have an example of a glass with some liquid on it. Whoa. See that? Overnight, you can get that much crystals. That's amazing. You can grow you can make this into an ashtray. I mean, a candle holder. So isn't it? Right? So if I got that much overnight, that's very fast, isn't it? So in the UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, wanted a crystal. So they grew one on their own, and they came up with this crystal. 2 months to get this much crystal. 2 feet in 2 months, roughly a foot a month. So if I have 65 feet, how long would it take to get, if I wanted 65 feet, how many months would it take? 65 months. So I get a month per, wait a minute. So based on what we've observed, the rate of crystal growth, it will not take hundreds of thousands of years. I can get that 65 feet of crystals in 5 years. So that's what you're looking at, is what are the assumptions that are being stated. Now, because people say it with authority and Dr. such and such, just ask yourself the question, what is the assumptions that are being made? Why do I have to believe it takes hundreds of thousands of years when actually we can get it 2 feet in 2 months? I don't. All right. So we need to look at it, just to recap. The Bible tells us that everything was created good. Adam messed things up. And the bad things that we see are results after Adam brought death and disease and suffering into the world. Okay. So what are you going to do now? Y'all say, that's all very interesting. But these questions are going to come up all the time. And you need to. I was at a Seventh-day Adventist church this morning. The pastor, he was on, he's telling people, you got to get this material. You got to educate yourself. This is very important. He was on for 10 minutes. I said, man, you might as well continue on and give the message but he wanted everybody to buy everything. And I would have been happy because they don't have to lug it around. But they couldn't actually buy anything because it's the Sabbath. They can only order it. So I totally agree with him. This is extremely important because we live in a society that bases a lot on the idea that evolution is true. Things are millions and billions of years old. This is assumed to be true. But what we've seen here today, just some examples of where that assumption is not borne out actually by the scientific evidence. Actually, the scientific evidence is au contraire. But you wouldn't have got that unless I was here, right? So even though there's a website, there's lots of information out there, you need to equip yourselves. You need to avail yourself of the resources, the books and the DVDs and stuff like that. You need to get what you need, and especially if you have children. You need to get them the resources they need. And one of the best resources we have is our Creation magazine. There's no ads on it. It's a very easy readable. I have children's section, some more adult-oriented, young people-oriented. We also have a technical journal. That's for the PhD level. That's a lot deeper. We're not talking about that here. So it's given as a subscription service. So you sign up, and I'm going to ask the usher to get ready. Okay. So it's a subscription, only $7.50 every 3 months, which is like $30 a year, and you can start handing them out. Thank you, sir. Jim. Yes, that's Craig, isn't it? Yeah. Funny guy. Okay. So and it will be, you get actually a hard copy, a magazine. You can see some out there. You actually get it on digital version that you can put on 5 digital devices. If you sign up today, You can also get a copy of a past magazine, which is a $6 value, and you get a free DVD, which is a $14 value. That's $20 gift for signing up for the Creation magazine. And you pay nothing today. Okay? And what we're doing is you fill out this form, it's a tear-off form, and so you fill out the personal information on one side, and on the other side, payment information. It'll come off of a checking account, in other words, a void check or the information they're on, or a credit card. You put that information on the back and then make sure to sign it. Then you tear off that form, filled out, and you give it to Craig at the back. At the counter. He will give you your magazine and your DVD. And this supports the ministry. It provides continuous income for the ministry. What are the type of things you're going to find in Creation magazine? Well, this is an older one, but this is black and white twins. Two-tone twins, they call them. Look at that. And these are actually one very black, one's very white. So aren't they two different races? Well, how can they be different races if they're twins? Their parents are brown. That explains it. So what you have is, and their Mendelian genetics, this is a normal to be expected. Adam and Eve were more than likely brown. They would have had a genetic code for the skin colors everywhere from very black to very white, okay? And everywhere in between. So these parents are brown. They have, by Mendelian genetics, it makes sense, one kid very white, one kid very brown, black. Right? You can imagine these two girls going to school. This is my sister. Get out. That's nice. This is really my sister, my twin sister. How is that possible? Aren't we all separate races? Well, how many races are there? There's only one. There's only human race. We all have different variations of them, right? Some have blue eyes, some have brown eyes, some have dark skin, some have white skin, some have different colors. Okay? Also, this is a very popular resource, 60 of the most often asked questions on creation and evolution. The Answers book, highly recommended. There's also another book that's also, it comes in a pack with another book. So this is very good for teen level, for starter level, for people that says, I got questions like, where did Cain get his wife? That's a good question. For those of you who want the scientific stuff, we have Evolution Achilles Heel. So our PhD scientists have compiled this on the strong points of evolution, and creationists attack those and showing how they're not really as strong as that they're led to believe. There's a book and a DVD, and if you buy both of them, you get $5 off. This is particularly good for people who are going to university. This is particularly good for people who say, I don't believe in religion, I believe in science. Oh, you do? Very interesting. I happen to have a book for you. Are you willing to read it? That's the question. Right? We also have another book, The Greatest Hoax on Earth. I'm not sure if I have that one, but this is also one. Refuting Evolution, also an excellent, this is entry level. You know, for a lot of people, this whole question of creation and evolution is like, wow, okay, this is deep, right? So you need to start somewhere. This is a book where you can start somewhere. It's meant for high school age and people. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end. Le fin. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a break, and then we'll have a question and answer period. If you have to go, thank you very much for attending, and just make sure you pick up a whole lot of material. And if not, then we'll be back in about 10-15 minutes for a Q&A session. Okay? You can ask any question for which I have answers for. How are you doing, sir? Good.